Thank you for tuning in to this first episode of All Things MSP Evolutions. We here at All Things MSP really want to help the common MSP look into the future with this podcast and see what they can do to meet the needs and the demands of their clients in the future, as well as better react, or better yet, be proactive about how they're going to step into the next several months and the next several years of their business. So that's what All Things MSP Evolutions is about. And this first episode is really exciting because it talks about something that we don't normally think of as a future thing. And I really think it should be. The topic du jour is vendor management. And my guests today are Erick with a K, Simpson, and Rich Freeman from Channel Mastered, who have their own podcast, MSP Chat. Stay tuned after the show for my thoughts and insights into the conversation, as well as a resource for you to get started managing your vendors instead of them managing you. Elevate your IT managed service provider business with SuperOps, the all-in-one platform that integrates RMM and PSA. Powered by AI-driven insights and automation, SuperOps helps you stay ahead, streamline operations, and boost efficiency. Are you ready for operational excellence? Find out more at atmsp.link/SuperOps. Hey there, All Things MSP crew. This is the very first episode of the new All Things MSP deep dive podcast called ATMSP Evolutions. And today we're going to be talking about something that has kind of evolved into this thing that every MSP, I think, needs to be aware of and start doing as part of their best practices in their business. And that is vendor management. Once upon a time, you could get away with just signing up with a new vendor and that'd be okay. Cybersecurity, supply chain attacks, all kinds of things have started to rear their ugly heads in terms of vendors. And they're things that we need to be paying attention to. So, of course, with me today, I have Rich Freeman and Erick Simpson from Channel Mastered, who are obviously, well known in this space. Don't need a lot of introduction, but I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves anyway.
Well, thank you so much, Eric. I actually, I think you may have mentioned this earlier on, but I've forgotten that this is your inaugural episode of All Things MSP Evolution. So we are actually very excited. We were looking forward to this conversation anyway. We're super excited to be on the very first episode of the show, and super excited to share that with our audience as well. So Eric and I, as you said, are two of the founders of Channel Mastered. This is a consultancy that works with vendors that have or would like to have or would like to improve MSP partner programs. Eric and I are also the co-hosts of our own podcast as well, and we are simulcasting this conversation on that podcast too. It's called MSP Chat. And folks in your audience, Eric, will find that wherever it is they get audio podcasts. They'll find it on YouTube, et cetera. So specifically me, I'm the Chief Content Officer and Channel Analyst at Channel Mastered. Eric, with a K, over to you.
Yeah, so I'm a recovering MSP, as many of us are nowadays. Built and sold one of the first MSPs in the industry, and then founded MSP University, and have been working with MSPs ever since that day. So I'm not going to age myself and tell you guys how long ago it was, but those that know. Today, I love working with MSPs. I love working with vendors. I love working with entrepreneurs, and just making a better ecosystem and community that we all participate in and grow together. So thanks again, Eric, for having us on. This is exciting. Congratulations on launching the new podcast.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for doing this kind of joint collaboration where we're posting it on, All Things MSP Evolutions, but we're also posting it on MSP Chat. So super excited for that as well. And, we kind of mentioned vendors. This is kind of more obviously geared towards the MSP audience, but we all know that we have some vendors who watch these shows as well. And so vendors, you should probably kind of listen up to this one, because although we're giving it as a blueprint for MSPs, it should also be the model by which you are trying to create the right partnership program for your MSP partners. So I've got some questions, and I know you guys have some questions too. We're going to just kind of go back and forth on this in a way. But I want to gear it towards kind of how does this affect the new MSP? How does it affect what existing MSPs are doing in 2024? What's changing? Because ATMSP Evolutions is about the future. And I think this is something that's very relevant for the future because it is something that's changing. So in your mind, and I'll start with Eric, in your mind, what kind of is the definition of and scope of vendor management to you?
Oh boy. Well, I look at it from two perspectives, right? Because and this is something that every MSP looks at as well. It's managing our own vendor relationships, but on top of that, it's managing our clients' vendor relationships, right? And sometimes there's crossover. Sometimes the clients' vendor relationships are the vendor relationships that we introduce to our clients. And sometimes the clients' vendor relationships are things that come with a new client, right? And so our job as MSPs in managing these vendor relationships, I think, can be boiled down into a couple of, I think, simple ideas, which means we need to have the best relationship with our vendors, whether they are our vendors, we're sharing our vendors with our clients, or managing their vendors, so that we have influence and leverage on delivering the best service and outcome for our clients. Now, as MSPs, Eric, you well know that when we consider engaging with a vendor to power our services or to help us grow our businesses, we're typically evaluating them from a couple of different perspectives. The first one is, will bringing this vendor on be good for my clients, right? Is it a product, service, or solution that I'm adding into my stack that today's MSPs have had to adapt and adjust to, as you kind of introduced in your intros? Like we are post-pandemic now. Today's buyers are buying different things than what they used to buy. So we're focused now on cyber security, cloud and SaaS application management, hybrid workforce support, right? So cybersecurity being, the through line through all of this. So is this product, service, or solution good for my clients? Is it good for my team? Or am I just adding vendor sprawl, right? That's a common challenge that MSPs are looking at now. And how do I address that additional cost and make sure that I'm profiting from it with my clients? Not that we're, we just want to make sure that we're meeting our minimum target margins. And then thirdly, how easy is it for me to integrate into my processes and platforms, bill for it, and sell it and manage it, right? So I think from the perspective of what does an MSP look like from a vendor management perspective, Rich, you've got stats on this, how many, vendor relationships a typical MSP has. So I'm going to kick that over to you to chime in here, but it's a lot. It's certainly a lot more than when I had my MSP practice and sold it many years ago, right? So there has to be a give and a get. That's a partnership between us and our vendors. And we have to work together in unison to grow each of our respective organizations. Every one of us has different needs. And, Rich and I do a session at many events where we talk about, the difference between vendors and MSPs, one being from Mars, one being from Venus, and what we look for in good collaboration in order to go to market together and succeed and thrive. So I'm going to stop there and kick it over to Rich.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't have the specific statistic you were alluding to there, Eric, at my fingertips, but I can say that based on multiple research studies I've seen just within the last month or two, that by and large, MSPs are consolidating their vendor relationships. So we'll probably get into consolidation at some point in this conversation. But they have a lot of vendor relationships to juggle, and partially as a result, they're actually looking to reduce those numbers right now. The other thing I want to follow up on a little bit, things that both Erics on this podcast have talked about. Because Eric, without a K, you were saying that the vendor management issue is even more relevant than it normally is right now. And I would totally agree, in part because the population of vendors out there continues to grow and grow and grow, and specifically the population of vendors who want to do business with MSPs. So you're going to have more and more companies coming after you, trying to win over your business. You're going to wind up having a lot of vendors to evaluate and some decisions to make about how many relationships that you want to have. And then the other thing, Eric with a K, you were kind of talking about vendor management as an opportunity to influence vendors. And I think precisely because there are so many newcomers to the MSP channel right now, that's especially important. To the degree that you are partnering with a vendor who's relatively new to MSPs, you really want to kind of take advantage of that opportunity to kind of show them the ropes a little bit, help them understand what's important to you, so that they can learn rapidly and accommodate those wishes.
Yeah, and you mentioned something, Eric. You talked about how you're not just dealing with your own vendors, you're dealing with your clients' vendors as well. And that's what we call ecosystem now. And, it used to be there was a channel. It went from our vendor through us to our client. And it's not that way anymore. It's much more of a network of vendors, clients, and providers. And so it's a very different world in that aspect as well. Any comments on the ecosystem versus traditional channel piece?
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing at Channel Master and what a lot of analysts are sharing is that we are moving toward more of an ecosystem future. And this is a scenario where, Eric, these clients that are coming to us are basically transacting more directly for some of these applications or for some of these services, and to have a seat at the table, to be welcomed in as a strategic value add to maybe an ecosystem of other vendors, which may not be delivering technology or security services. But Jay McBain will tell us, these folks include attorneys and accountants and these trusted advisors that now these business owners see as their core team of advisors moving forward. So I think from that perspective, Eric, it's important for today's MSPs to uh, become more mature in a more strategic focus to add that value, or else risk being replaced by a competitor that can be perceived as adding more strategic value and having a seat at the table and being one of these core strategic advisors that our clients are now seeking to build in their growth strategy moving forward, or grow with in this strategy moving forward, and understand who they are and work together to deliver these services. And I think if we're successful at doing that, then that just means that we're going to continue to grow the longevity of those client relationships and become more deeply valuable and identify more opportunities to introduce the services and solutions that clients need, and will not be seen as a cost center, but be more trusting to say yes to some of these things, because we're having those conversations from a more business outcome perspective rather than a technology solution outcome perspective.
Right. And it's that technology solution aspect and that influencer, you use the word influencer in your earlier answer, that really makes a difference and segments it out from the traditional channel, because ecosystem, you're right, it's more about influence, and it's not just delivering IT services anymore, right? It's almost, and I hate to use this term because some people are probably going to take it wrong, but a virtual CTO, somebody who's actually managing the technology and how it's being used rather than just the bits and bytes.
Yeah, and I would offer that we see and hear this term bandied about a lot, virtual CTO, and I think that there's a misconception of what that role really is or should be among a lot of MSPs, Eric and Rich. I think, they see this as, oh, well, it's table stakes for me to have that as kind of one of the bullet points in my deliverable. But really to understand what that means, I mean, I've been a CTO in the enterprise and a CIO in the enterprise. I understand that role is much different than what many MSPs think it is, and fail to deliver on the promise to their clients. And so when you're thinking about becoming that strategic advisor, that influencer, you take virtual out of it. You are now the CTO for that organization. It's just like when people say, oh, we're outsourcing our help desk, or when you bring in as an MSP an outsourced third party to help you, take care of the noise, level 1, level 2, or maybe higher level escalation. And the technicians, start blaming mistakes on that outsourced help desk, when in fact they should be saying, hey, this is our help desk. They're part of our team. We're delivering that to our clients. So just like, own the responsibility of what a CTO does and deliver it fractionally, but don't call it virtual. Don't call it fractional. This is kind of an embedded advisory role that you
Right.
have. And when you start thinking about it that way, it changes the perception of what you feel is necessary. And then it allows you then to say, well, let me change my pricing model to accommodate that, because it's not some virtual thing that I'm adding on. Call me when you need me. I'm going to have QBRs. This is I am directing the technology decisions and having some budget ownership in my clients' relationships. It's a completely different perspective in my mind.
Yep.
And to
Now, Rich, you had
follow
a
up
comment.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a number of really interesting things that I want to quickly follow up on. And so, first of all, to tag in on what Eric was talking about there, um, you really want to have that CTO, that technology advisor role in your customer accounts right now for a couple of different reasons. One of which being, this is what customers are looking for right now. Increasingly, and they indicate this in all sorts of different ways, research studies, et cetera. They want, cliche alert, but they do want digital transformation. They want solutions and not products. They're looking for somebody to guide them on the best ways to apply technology for their business. So you want to be the person who's meeting that demand. At the same time, a lot of the stuff that MSPs have historically done, network management, device management, et cetera, less and less strategic, more and more commodified, less and less profitable. So 2 good reasons there, basically, to be that CTO, CIO to your clients. And then the other thing I'll point out, just in the general area of ecosystem versus those traditional channel relationships you were talking about, Eric, is it kind of changes the dynamics between MSPs and the vendors that they partner with. So once upon a time, you might not even have considered working with a vendor who sells direct, for example, but there are a lot of great partner MSP opportunities out there these days in the ecosystem era with companies that do sell direct sometimes. And in fact, sometimes the best thing you can do as an MSP is let the end user handle the procurement and, go ahead and buy direct. They're going to buy the software through some SaaS vendor and not know what to do with it. And that's when you step in with the strategic advice and the monitoring and the maintenance and management and so on that's going to make you sticky with that client. So the evaluation criteria for vendors in the ecosystem era, I think, is a little bit different.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. And the way I envision the role of CTO, and by the way, Eric, I love the fact that, drop the V, drop the virtual. The lawyer for the small business doesn't call them their virtual lawyer. They're just their lawyer. So yes, I think it's very appropriate to just call yourself the CTO for a small to medium sized business. And that role is not just reselling services or reselling products from a vendor. It's exactly what Rich described. It's not just about selling services or selling a product through a vendor. You're actually going and providing it's a higher level than that. So whether they're buying it from you or whether they're buying it direct, you are still the one involved in the decision. I think this is something that is just kind of a little bit of a difference, but it's very important in terms of it's consulting is what we've kind of traditionally called it, but it's also you're involved at a level that we've never been involved before as traditional MSPs. And what I mean by that, I guess, is that you are not just taking something that they're telling you they want to buy and configuring it, installing it, and whatnot. You're actually part of the process of deciding which product is the best one for their business. And that's where it becomes a little bit trickier because in the past, a lot of MSPs haven't done that. They've relied on the customer to say, this is the solution we want, rather than the MSP going in as the CTO and determining what the best product to solve that problem is.
I think that's the highest value that we can deliver to a client is, again, owning that role and saying, the definition of a CTO is I'm going to guide the technology strategy for this organization. And I'm going to evaluate everything that's going on with every user, every platform, every service. It sounds daunting, but you eat the elephant one bite at a time. You prioritize what's going on in the environment. I was just on a coaching call with an MSP yesterday and, guiding them on delivering this role as the CTO. And I said, let's survey the users. Don't survey the business owner. Let's survey the users on their workflow, on their challenges. Maybe the business owner doesn't know that it takes the AP, AR department, days or weeks to get accounts receivable and invoicing out, just like MSPs are very familiar with that, right? Maybe it takes them, 75 mouse clicks to cut an invoice or to pay, payroll or whatever that is. Users over time, they feel like, oh, okay, this is just how it's done. And that's what I have to do. And maybe they've raised concerns, but the business owner is busy with other things and may not take immediate action. But when we analyze and survey and say, oh my goodness, we should upgrade to this new version of the platform, or maybe we should look at different platforms or changing some process to make it more efficient for that valued staff member who is the most valuable resource in that organization to do what they were hired to do and not lose a lot of time, just dealing with things that aren't efficient. So things like that, doing a survey of different business units and owning that, and then prioritizing it in our 3 or 5 year technology roadmap plan that we are directing. Now, you may have someone else in the organization that is doing the QBRs, but the CTO is involved in that and takes that feedback or injects feedback in to guide that, and not only to sell more stuff, right, Eric and Rich, but to make sure that that business owner and that organization is getting the most out of the technology and services they're already investing in.
Yeah, you're reminding me. And so, surveying the end users, I think is a really smart way to approach this. But I know MSPs who, particularly at a new account, will, just go on site with the customer, assuming folks, there's an office there to go on site too, wander around and talk to the employees because you're going to learn about needs and issues and pain points that the business owner, the CEO might not know about, might not have top of mind. And that's going to give you an opportunity to bring ideas to the CEO that they don't know to ask you about. I'm remembering a story I was told years ago by the then CEO of BitTitan. And there was an attorney from their outsourced legal firm who came on site at BitTitan headquarters to spend 2 days there and do exactly what I'm talking about, wander around, talk to people. And this guy got a meeting with the CEO and asked him at one point, what more can we do for you to be a great legal partner for you? And the CEO's answer basically was, tell me the thing that you can do that I don't know to ask you for, because I'm not a lawyer. Right? And that's what the MSP clients out there want from you as well. They absolutely want you to help them with the problems they know they have. But they want you to identify problems maybe that they didn't know they have and show them how to fix those.
Yeah. And
Rich, that's great guidance. And I recommend that MSPs do that and survey the users during onboarding. Like, do a survey first, get everybody's pain and challenges out, and then you can have follow up, maybe a little focus group, maybe a little different meeting, speak to individuals, right? And bring that information that that business owner may not even be aware of into the conversation. As we want to address the immediate pain. Buyers want to address an immediate pain. I have this challenge. I need this fixed. But then there are all these other latent needs that also need to be addressed. And they're always looking at, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? Well, let's look at this thing as a whole. And maybe we can put together an approach that addresses a lot of things in one fell swoop. And then, you're looking for early wins in those brand new relationships, right? And the users and the business owners, by now they've had MSPs already, right? You're in there replacing somebody else, odds are. And so you need to make a quick bunch of wins and make a quick difference to elevate the the perception of value, to confirm that buyer's decision to engage with you, that business owner, and to let the users know, wow, this is refreshing and different. I like this new CTO and their company, right? And that's a great way to kick off a new client relationship.
And it's an excellent way to differentiate yourself as well. There's another thing that we brought up early on, and that was sprawl, the number of new vendors that are in our space now, and kind of a lot of small vendors as well. So there's a lot of this, these vendors are doing a very consistent job of trying to get into the pockets of MSPs. And maybe they have a great tool. Maybe they have a tool that the client needs or the MSP needs. But with so many of them out there, so many of them banging on the door, there was a post, I forget where it was. I think it was probably on Facebook or LinkedIn today, where somebody was calling an MSP at 5:30 in the morning to try and get their business. Obviously, that didn't go over very well. So, vendors that are listening to the call, please don't do that. It will ruin your chances. But how does the average MSP now go about filtering through this just massive field of new vendors that continue to come knocking?
That's
I
tough.
was actually going to raise this question and maybe get your take on it, Eric, because it's an interesting one and it's kind of on my mind as well. I mean, traditionally, if you're out looking, evaluating vendors, the table stakes requirement is, do they integrate with my PSA? Do they have a multi-tenant interface? And there are all these young newcomers to the industry right now that don't necessarily have that yet, but are maybe headed towards that. And so it raises the question, do you just filter them out until they do have it? Because it's really just not acceptable. It's not going to be practical or profitable to work with them until they do. Or where do you set the bar where, like in cybersecurity, for example, there's something so new and different and exciting about this capability here that I have to at least consider doing business with them, even though they don't have that maturity that the more established vendors have. I think it's a harder question to answer now than it used to be.
Oh, I think it absolutely is. Eric, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's very challenging. There's so much more to filter through now. In the olden days, right? Things were simpler. Everybody used the same stuff, and the differentiator was how the relationship with your client and that kind of thing. And today there is so much interest and attention focused on the MSP channel because vendors know that kind of that's the golden goose. I mean, these are the advisors that can allow or deny their entry into their end users environments. Like, we have that influence, and so more and more vendors are seeing that. Like, we know at a Channel Master, we work with a lot of pre-launch vendors that are just getting funding and things like that, and are looking for market assessment, product market fit, and all this. And we have these conversations with them. How do you distinguish and differentiate yourself from who the MSP thinks you compete with? And, other than the table stakes that we've already talked about, like the business necessities for an MSP to even consider you, where do MSPs go to get objective feedback? And today there are lots of communities. There's social media. Now you got to be careful, right, out there, because it's tricky. There are some platforms that are a little bit, you got to take it with a grain of salt. But who do you engage with? Who are your posse that you get your information from? There are tons of great podcasts like yours, Eric, like ours. There are lots of communities out there. There are peer groups. There are lots of ways that you can get feedback, but you've still got to filter it out. And you have to have a mindset, I think, as an MSP that says, I'm going to reevaluate my entire solution stack on a regular basis, not just one thing or the other thing. I do a lot of work with MSPs that want to, bundle and price and add, like, hey, I need enhanced cybersecurity stack now so I can sell it to my clients. And what they fail to realize is they're dragging along maybe some legacy stuff that doesn't meet today's needs from a cybersecurity perspective or something else, because they've been using it forever. And they just say, no, we've got that covered. No, I say, look, evaluate your entire stack. Buyers are different now than they were before. The threat and the risk is much different, but the opportunity is so much greater, leading with cybersecurity. And I say, look, evaluate and do this on a regular basis, maybe a yearly basis. Look at everything and look at what's in your stack and look at the rising cost of these services and solutions. And make sure that you're truing up your clients. Don't ask, permission first to raise your rates. Ask forgiveness afterwards. Hey, we've kept our pricing low. We've added these new services solutions. You'll see this reflected on your next invoice. And deal with the small, low, single-digit % of clients that complain, one at a time. And don't give them a pass. Just maybe negotiate their price increase a little bit different. Give them a little something to keep them on board. Or if they're C customers and you need to make room to take on more A clients because they're costing you money, then put yourself in a position to do that. But you've got to be profitable. You've got to be efficient and effective. And you've got to do what you're delivering your promise to your clients or your own company, to evaluate what's going on in the infrastructure and make different technology and vendor decisions to help you and, by extension, your clients.
And I'm going to quickly add one last little piece, because you were talking, Eric, there for a little bit about the wisdom of rethinking your stack on a regular basis, which I think is really smart and important advice. And to tie into a theme that's come up a number of different times here, precisely because you have more and more vendors competing for MSPs out there, you have more leverage in that conversation than you did before. So you can go to your vendors and say, look, it's my semi-annual rethink on the stack. Here's what I love about what you're doing for me, and here's where I'm not so happy and I'm looking around. What can we work out here? You don't necessarily own the outcome of that conversation, but you've got more leverage than you did before, particularly if you are one of those, high performance, profitable kind of MSPs Eric's talking about. If you're doing a good job, they want you, and that gives you some room to be a little bit more demanding in your conversations with vendors.
And the flip side of that, real quick, the flip side of that, Rich, is the competitors that you're talking to, the vendors, they know that you're working with that particular vendor, and they will sweeten the deal to lure you away. I mean, how many times have we heard that? When you've got a ton of endpoints you're managing, boy, oh boy, it gets pretty interesting in those conversations. Go ahead, Eric.
Well, I was just going to say that in terms of the competition and the leverage, Rich, that you just talked about, that is 100% true. It used to be that MSPs had no leverage with their vendors. Back, Eric, when you and I were MSPs, we kind of took what we had to take because, first of all, there wasn't a lot of choices out there, number one. But number two, the traditional channel model flows one way. And that's another difference with ecosystem is ecosystem, because it's interconnected, the influence flows both ways. And so I think it's absolutely correct that if MSPs are not pushing back on their vendors today, they need to be. They need to be. And then, Rich, you were saying something about what was it? I'm trying to remember. Oh, the risk profile of a vendor. What do you do when you're looking at a vendor, you like what they have, but they can't really put a finger on how much risk they're going to be to you by providing the right certifications and best practices and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's really, really hard. You know, and I once upon a time, and I should probably say I didn't mention this before, but in addition to being part of the team at Channel Mastered, I'm a journalist who has covered the channel for many, many years. I was the founding editor, former editor-in-chief at Channel Pro. I've got a blog called Channelholic these days that you can find at channelholic.news. Once upon a time, I remember writing an article. I had a conversation with a venture, one of the managing partners at a venture capital company, because I wanted to kind of understand how his mind works, how a VC firm's mind works when they're evaluating vendors. It's a similar kind of challenge. And, you know, one of the key variables that they're looking at is that risk element. They're, you know, obviously looking at the strength of the technology and how much, as this guy put it, white space there is in the market. Is this something new? There's a lot of upside growth potential, or are they entering some sort of mature market and it's going to be a fight to get in there? But once they've convinced themselves there's something there, they're looking at things like, well, who's behind this company? Who founded this company? What have they done before? What do I know about them? Because it really is it's a giant problem, basically, if you place a big bet on a company, you know, on behalf of your business and your clients' businesses, and they go under, their security practices don't, you know, stand up the test of time, and so on. So I think there are areas in a traditional MSP vendor relationship where, you know, you're going to need to be a little bit more flexible than you were before in terms of things like, are they not channel only, for example? Are they, you know, how many PSA integrations do they have? Some of the stuff that we've talked about before. But I do think there are some bedrock things you really have to kind of satisfy yourself about before you forge that relationship. And I think that financial risk, that security risk, that relationship risk is pretty high up on that list.
Yeah, and we've kind of offered them some practical advice already, right? We've told them that they should be reevaluating their stack from time to time. I would say at least once a year, if not twice. And you have to start there because you have to start from where your needs are and where your clients' needs are before you start going looking at vendors. Now, I think it's fun to go to a trade show, for instance, and see what's new. And something might catch, right? You might see something new that catches on, and you say, well, that's something that I can add to my stack that I can sell, or I can create an efficiency with that's going to drive to my bottom line. But other than that, a lot of times it can be a distraction, especially with as hard as those vendors are working to get your attention. So in terms of practicals, make sure that, you know, you're doing the evaluations, but you're not letting everybody kind of pitch to you all the time. And then also, you know, obviously cybersecurity credentials are important. And a lot of this comes down to what I'd like to probably encourage MSPs to do, and that is to create an actual vendor management policy within your organization that spells these things out. Eric, what do you think about an MSP creating a vendor management policy?
I think it's part of your R&D process, right? So the more mature MSPs, you know, we did this in my MSP. It's like we established an R&D policy, and it covered different things, different areas, specifically around vendors and solutions and services. So, you know, when is it that we reevaluate a product, service, solution, or a particular vendor? What is it that we're trying to do? Are we trying to replace something in our stack? Do we have a client that has this, you know, kind of outlier need that we, you know, decide, okay, if we can make this a success, then we can roll it out to more clients. How do we do that? Do they have like pilot programs? So there's lots of criteria that you just apply as an overlay to a vendor evaluation, just like you would do for a client that says, hey, I need to, rip and replace this technology. You've never worked with it before. You're going to engage with a vendor and you're going to do a pilot and you're going to see how it goes. You're going to, implement it inside your organization first as kind of a test. You may, get a client that's interested in engaging in that, and you say, okay, well, let's deploy to a business unit first, and then see how that works. So there are a lot of evaluation criteria that go into that. So, but the first step is to say, yes, we're going to establish a policy whereby all of these things fit. What is the policy? What is the scorecard that elevates the need for one thing over another? Like, what takes the most priority? Because like you were saying, Eric, we don't want to just look at everything all the time, all at once, right? We have to have a process whereby there is a structure and we elevate the next thing that we're looking for and have a plan. So like you said, a great way to engage with a ton of vendors is at a trade show, at a conference, in an expo hall, but have a plan for that and say, look, I'm looking to fit this, this need right now. So I'm going to make the most efficient use of my time. Maybe there's a couple that I'll talk to because there are other things on that lower priority list, but I'm going to get the information and data I need by talking to them directly and understanding whether or not in my scorecard, they are a contender. And so you have your different things that mean different things for different MSPs. You may have, different requirements, or the stack ranking is a little bit differently, but they're going to include some of the table stakes stuff that we already talked about. Then you're going to add, the things that make you different or unique, or what your clients' needs are different or unique, and have a process for that. So the important thing is to establish a framework, the process, and then stick to the process. Don't color outside the lines. I see a lot of, technicians get excited and go, oh, well, I like this other feature that they have, but they don't have this feature that's required. Well, you got to stick to your guns. If you're going to get traction in your business, you got to stay focused, and you're going to make a long-term commitment. I mean, it takes a lot to introduce a new product or service or solution into your stack and deploy to your clients, or to rip and replace something that's already out there because maybe the technology is old, they're not updating it often enough, the new stuff is on a way better platform, it's multi-tenant, right? It solves a lot of issues. So it's a deep conversation that I think needs consideration internally before you just start, firing first and aiming afterwards.
Yeah.
And I'll test this proposition as well. I'm the one non-MSP, current or former, in this conversation here right now. But I would think part of the appeal, the logic, the benefit of having a vendor management policy is not only is that going to increase the consistency and the effectiveness of the evaluation process, you're going to be asking the same questions every time. You're not going to overlook a question that you really should be thinking about when you're approaching a new vendor. But also, you guys, the Ericks, you tell me, you could share that policy with vendors you're evaluating potentially. Here's how I evaluate the vendors I partner with. Take a look at this list. What do you got? And then they know what they need to address with you. See how effectively they can do that.
Yeah.
I love having them qualify themselves to you, right?
Correct.
Kind of like, have them. Yeah. It probably saves a lot of time. The vendor can say, oh yeah, we can do like 6 of these things, but not the other 4. Thanks for your time. Right?
Yep. And honestly, most of the time they probably have more time and more people to do that self-evaluation first rather than you having to do it. And it'll save you a lot of time.
Absolutely. And, there are other things that come into this, questionnaire, things like, MDF, partner program benefits. I mean, all these other things that are, you go need to have and then nice to have. Right. Yep. And so when you have 2 competing vendors, that the need to have stuff is, I could go either way, but then one vendor has a few more nice to haves in there that can sway the decision.
Exactly. They'll end up higher on the scoring chart. And that's what you should do. You should literally score them. So it's less of how you feel about it and more about the actual facts involved with what they're satisfying, how risky they are and all of those other components that go into it.
Removing the emotion from the
Right.
decision. Yeah.
And, we talked about at the very beginning of the show, we talked about kind of the evolution of the MSP and the CTO role. And so I think we can actually take vendor policy management one step further. And that's an area because a lot of the vendors that clients have are technology-based vendors. We can actually extend that vendor management policy down into the client as well as part of the CTO role.
Yeah,
That's
I
a
think,
great point.
I think that anything that we spend time, energy, and effort into developing for ourselves is another value as to how many times and how many ways can we repurpose it. And I think that's a strong strategy, Eric, where you're sitting down with a client when you're presenting the value of the CTO service and why you should engage with us, and show them the scorecard. This is how we are going to evaluate every single vendor and every single solution that powers your business today. It reminds me of when, I used to sell our managed services in the early days. And this is one of my probably most downloaded free asset that I've given away over the years, is a 117 step new client onboarding process. And it was like every single thing that we did, and our sales team would go out and they would use that as a sales tool. Say, well, look, here's how we onboard our clients. And they'd share this exhaustive, checklist that the client would immediately say, wow, if my last provider had done that, I wouldn't be talking to you guys right now, right? And it set the tone for how they would interview every succeeding competitor after that. So I wanted to get in there early, right, and present it, because the first thing they're going to ask as part of the conversation, or part of one of the things they would ask, is, tell me about your onboarding process. And we would win every time, because back in the early days, right, not a lot of MSPs had matured to that level that we were at. And so it was a competitive advantage. So this is the same thing. Show a client a scorecard, show them how you're going to onboard them, and then execute on that. You can't promise something and not deliver, because then you're going to erode that confidence, and that, you're going to cool that relationship before it even gets a chance to get started, right?
Yep.
And it's a perfect example of what we were talking about before, bringing something to the client that they don't know to ask you for, because they haven't really, they've never seen a vendor management policy before. They haven't thought at all, haven't had time to think about the potential advantages of that. This is how you really sort of underscore your value to the clients, is by bringing them the stuff that will benefit them, that it never would have occurred to them to ask you about.
Now, Rich, as we're kind of wrapping this up, because I know we're kind of at what we decided was going to be our kind of time limit here, because you've interviewed so many vendors and MSPs over your career, what have you seen in terms of attitudes of the vendor MSP relationship that you've seen the more forward thinking vendors and MSPs kind of gravitate to?
So I think the on the MSP side of that equation, the most successful sort of forward-looking MSPs really do approach vendor relationships as a strategic partnership. And so so they're going to be a little bit more forgiving of mistakes in certain cases. They're going to be a little bit more direct about their aspirations. I'm trying to kind of encapsulate it a little bit, but it's a little bit more like less griping and more collaborative go-to-market strategizing. So understand, make sure the vendor understands what's important to you, but try to understand a little bit about what's important to them as well. And look for those opportunities. They should be doing this too. This should be happening on the vendor side too, but look for those opportunities to work well together. I think that mindset is very appealing to vendors. And then on the vendor side, I think the one, well, I mean, what I have certainly noticed, and this won't come as maybe a huge shock to either of you, but there are a lot of vendors out there who are liked among MSPs. But if you look at the ones that are really, really loved by, the ones that kind of inspire fanatical fandom, basically, they're the ones who demonstrate in everything they do, big things, small things, a genuine, not a lip service, but a genuine commitment to doing right by their partners. And that extends, from the basics like support, and how responsive they are and how helpful they are. How responsive and helpful are they on billing disputes and things like that. But just also those smaller things as well, where there's some relationship value. They're helping you out on the little things in a way that tells you these guys, genuinely give a darn about me and the success of my business. And people feel that. MSPs feel that. They know the difference between a company that just has the right pieces and parts in place there and a company that has a truly kind of an embedded culture of supporting and helping MSPs grow. And so on the vendor side, it's the companies that have been especially good at that. I'll go ahead and name two really obvious candidates. Pax8 and Datto come to mind. Just huge success stories in recent years. And there's a reason they have a lot of raving fans. Is they do more than add the kind of traditional value that good vendors add, and people can feel that love and feel that commitment in a way that inspires loyalty.
Yeah, partner first philosophy.
Yeah.
I love it.
And Eric, as we look, towards the future, the evolution of MSPs and the vendors that serve them, what is kind of the one thing that you would tell each group in terms of what they need to be looking forward to and evolving towards as MSPs and as vendors?
Wow. That's a great question, Eric. Only one thing only. Reminds me of The Hunt for Red October, when Sean Connery tells Vasily, he's trying to communicate with the American sub, and he's like, "Give me a ping, Vasily. One ping only." It's one thing only. So anyway, a little fun there. I think it's the open approach, or the openness to having collaborative conversations that can be direct, that can be difficult at times. And I think that on the vendor side, some of the vendors that we work with that are entering the market, we advise them to create early adopter programs, stand up some partner advisory councils or boards, right, to get the DNA and the feedback and the perspective and the likes and gripes and dislikes of a constituency of that represents the channel partners that they would like to build their programs with, and have a voice, and not just do it because it's a checklist thing, but to really, like you were talking about, Rich, like, the vendors that get it, and they listen, and they invite that sometimes hard to hear criticism, but take that feedback and have it influence product roadmap, strategy, things that need to be fixed. And those partners become your greatest advocates. These are the folks that create this fandom and are the tip of the spear for that. And then on the MSP side, look for opportunities to engage with vendors that have this ability. And don't just sit on the sidelines. If you feel like this vendor could be a great vendor if they just did these couple of things, step up and participate, and ask to either be invited for a position, or if they don't have it, lobby for them. Create a partner advisory council, listen to the partners, create some focus groups, do some peer group stuff. We want to, we see the value, but it takes both parties to want to do that. It can't be one-sided. We're all in this channel together. And I think, we can't just ask, and then get upset when we don't get what we want from a vendor or from an MSP. We have to collaborate together and see it for what it is. We're all going to be here, for a long, long time. And, the vendors and the partners that see it that way and see it as a collaborative, you know, learning opportunity and experience, like you were saying, Rich, will be the most successful together. But it takes somebody to start that. And I don't know what the chicken or egg thing, but together, the best relationships I've seen have included, that opportunity.
Yeah, I think you probably said it best in terms of you have to be proactive at the relationship. And that goes for the MSP or the vendor. It doesn't matter who starts first. It's everybody's responsibility to try and start first and create those meaningful relationships. Well, Rich, Eric, thank you so much for being here today. I really do appreciate it, and hope to see you on one sometime soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again soon, Eric.
Total blast for us as well.
All right, several important things came out of this first episode. First is the idea of the MSP ecosystem rather than the channel. It's the idea that clients, MSPs, vendors, and other third parties are interconnected rather than a unidirectional flow from vendor to MSP to client. This changes the influence dynamics in two very important ways. It means MSPs have more influence over vendors than ever before. Use this to your advantage. And there can be other parties involved with your clients that you need to be aware of and can possibly partner with. Second, because of the interconnectivity of the ecosystem, more and more vendors do not need you in order to transact with a client. This means that you need to drive more strategic value. Clients can buy, but what they can't often do is select, configure, and maintain the vendor's product. This is where your value comes in. Not as a simple outsourced IT, but as a fractional CIO, CTO, or CISO. Lastly, one of the best tactics you can use in this new ecosystem is to create and maintain vendor policies for you and your clients. These policies have strategic value and create value both in the initial creation and in recurring services around those policies. They also put you at a strategic level with your clients, not just taking help desk tickets, maintaining infrastructure, and providing security services. The final and maybe biggest advantage is that it puts you in control of the ecosystem map for your client, making you the central hub of all those relationships. So there you have it, the inaugural episode of All Things MSP Evolutions. This podcast will have monthly episodes. If you're looking for a weekly podcast, check out the original All Things MSP podcast with host Justin Escar and me, your friendly co-host and producer. We cover all kinds of topics relevant to you and your MSP business. But until next time, work like a captain and play like a pirate. Arr. All right, you are not imagining things. I forgot to give you the resource that I promised at the beginning of the show. So that is the MSP guidebook from CompTIA, and it has a section in it on vendor management, which I think is a great place to start if you're going to be looking at creating your vendor management policy or just creating a vendor management strategy in some way, shape, or form. So I'll put the link to that in the podcast notes and in the YouTube description. So check it out. Thanks. See you in the next one.